Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. Coming up, we'll see what's making the headlines with the PR consultant Alex Deane and the director of the Demos think tank, Mackenzie. They'll be with us right through until midnight. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, French holiday chaos is the splash for the Mail as a last-minute exception has been made, meaning that even people who've had both doses of the COVID vaccine must still quarantine for 10 days upon returning from France. Well, The Times has virtually the same headline and says hundreds of thousands of people are likely to be affected by that change. Well, that development is also the lead story for The Telegraph. The Mirror, meanwhile, quotes the government's chief medical officer, Professor Chris Whitty, warning that it may be necessary to reimpose lockdown within 5 weeks if the number of cases of the virus keeps on rising. And The Guardian has spoken to a Downing Street source who calls the increase in infections worrying. And the Financial Times carries criticism from health experts around the world who believe Boris Johnson is doing the wrong thing by lifting restrictions on Monday. The Sun is concerned it may not be possible to hold barbecues in the coming days. That's after thousands of staff at a meat factory were pinged by the NHS app. Meanwhile, the Express forecasts temperatures of 90 degrees Fahrenheit this weekend. And The Star reacts to that news by invoking the memory of the late Caroline Aherne in their headline, Scorchio. Well, we're joined tonight by Alex Deane and Mackenzie. Good evening to both of you. Good to see you both. I didn't envy the job of various newspapers' sub-editors this evening, did you, of that last-minute announcement coming about these changes to travellers coming back from France. We start, Polly, with the front page of the Daily Mail. Simply says, French holiday chaos.
Well, I think they're bang on because this announcement has come, even though hundreds of thousands of people will have already booked holidays in France. Some may already be in France, all on the assumption that for those of us who have been vaccinated, have to quarantine when we got home again. And that is now not going to happen. So even if you're double vaccinated, even if you do repeated tests, you will have to quarantine if you are coming back from France. And there's rumours circulating that they might even consider putting France on the red list, which would require people to have a hotel quarantine. Now, that's still very much a kind of, it's not being denied that it's being considered sort of level of possibility. And this is happening because of the South African variant, which is very prevalent, I think now called the beta variant, now very prevalent in France, which has a particular low vaccine efficacy for the AstraZeneca vaccine. They stopped using AstraZeneca in South Africa partly because of that reason. And lots of people in the UK have the AstraZeneca vaccine. So public health officials are very worried about trying to keep that beta variant out. We are dominated by the Delta variant at the moment, and I can't think what's next.
Yeah, Alex, also very similar front page on the front page of The Times there. A lot of speculation, though, ahead of this announcement that was this to do with public health? Because if you look at the figures, the number of cases in France, relatively very low compared to some other European countries, certainly compared to the UK. Is there some politics at play here?
Yes, polygamma would be next. I think what we are looking at now is a situation in which our rate, on the face of it, is much worse than the rate in France. And we, on that logic, you might think we would encourage people to be in that environment rather than discouraging them from going there or punishing them for coming back. What we've effectively done is to create a position between the amber list and the red list. There's now a new position, amber plus, I suppose, or red minus, that we've now put France into at no notice. Awful for anyone seeking to go. Of course, the government's trying to do the right thing, but having this sort of thing thrust upon you right at the very last moment is the kind of thing that is going to make thousands of people's lives a misery in the coming weeks and over these summer holidays. But I do think more generally, Sam, there's another point to be taken from this, because, and Polly was getting at it, that we're increasingly treating the vaccinated as if they were unvaccinated. And we're going to rub out a lot of kind of public goodwill in the sense that we're in this together and that we're going to get through it and come out the other side, because the message for so long has been that that jabs were the way out, the vaccine was the way that we were going to get back to normality. And instead now we are reversing and we're going back to situations where people who have been vaccinated are being treated, and like in this case, as if they haven't been vaccinated at all. It's really worrying more generally. It's not just about France. The direction of travel here is bad.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I suppose, with uncertainty, Polly, I mean, that's not at all what the travel industry wanted, is it? Mixed messaging.
No, it's catastrophic for the travel industry. I mean, we saw earlier in the week the shift of the Balearic Islands, obviously a massive holiday destination for Brits, was met with horror and, real upset by the travel industry. This is always going to be a really difficult balance. And, travel and hospitality are devastated by these. And, it may be that more intervention is needed by both, within this and more broadly by other countries to support those kind of essential sectors for all of humanity, so that they aren't just dominated by airline and hotel bankruptcies because of this incredible uncertainty.
Yeah, I suppose we should point out that you can, as it stands, still test and release, can't you, after 5 days if you decide to still go to France. But you can understand why a lot of people might be concerned about still going. Let's talk about the front page of The Sun, Alex. Oh, burger is the headline. And just to add final indignity to all of the uncertainty around the summer, a ping threat to barbecue meat supplies.
Well, it's a genuine issue, and it's in a number of the insides of the newspapers too, that workforces are being threatened there's a threat that they won't get back up to meaningful scale or come back away from meaningful scale having got there, because people are being required to self-isolate in such numbers now. And the government has said it won't reduce the sensitivity of the ping register, despite the fact that people are getting pinged through their walls when their neighbours have come back reporting have been in contact with people and so forth. And what it's meaning is that lots of factories are losing entire production lines because they haven't got the workers to man them. And the Sun's got hold of this, as always, in a way that's quite kind of eye-catching and evocative, and points out that one of our biggest meat processing plants is unlikely to be able to continue in operation because of this. But more generally, it looks like we're going to have port operations frustrated, infrastructure, rail frustrated, because we are going to be requiring people up into the millions, quite likely, to self-isolate if we carry on in these numbers. The Institute of Economic Affairs is quoted in one of these newspapers saying it'll set back our economic recovery by months if we carry on in this direction. Yeah,
it's the irony, isn't it, Polly? Just very briefly to you, that just as we're trying to get the economy back on track with the final removal of all these restrictions, and half the people can't go to work.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that it's not as simple as you just end the restrictions and then people can go back to normal, because ending the restrictions actually enables cases to rise, which leads to more pings. If we had the restrictions in place, there'd probably be fewer pings, because cases wouldn't have risen or be, expected to rise potentially to 100,000 a day, according to some projections. And it's that question between our kind of normal everyday freedoms and essential service workers, like people in burger factories, but also, a range of other essential services, them being able to work. And so in a way, we've got the kind of general population freedom is causing a wider consequence for the kind of essential infrastructure.
Yeah, who knew that pinged was going to be such a regular part of our vocabulary these days? Polly, Alex, stay tight. We'll be back with you after the break. Coming up, could the decision to press ahead with reopening mean that we could soon be back in lockdown? We'll be discussing that jolly prospect coming up next. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me back again, Alex Deane and Polly Mackenzie. Let's take a look, if we can, Polly, at the front page of the Daily Mirror. And never mind people's holidays to France being cancelled. And this one says, lockdown in 5 weeks fear. And it's quoting Professor Chris Whitty, describing the rise in number of cases here as quite scary.
Yeah, I mean, you'll remember that, early in the year, the whole rollout, this unlocking down plan, was designed to be irreversible. And that was how they bought permission to go slowly, was this promise that we would go slowly enough that it would be the end of it once it was over. And cases are now so high. Chris Whitty is quoted sort of saying we've doubled and we've doubled again. We've doubled the deaths, we've doubled the hospitalizations, and we've doubled the cases. Don't have to go through many doublings before that gets out of control and really very scary. And so they are warning, though public health officials have done this throughout, that we might need to kind of junk that concept of it being irreversible. And once the summer comes towards its end, we might need to lock down again.
Yeah, well, that's really the front page of The Guardian, isn't it, Alex? Talking about, as we approach the 19th and what some people and some of the newspapers have been describing as Freedom Day. Should we be doing that, given the state of affairs with the number of infections?
Yes, an increasing effort, isn't there, from the public health lobby to suggest that the government is isolated internationally and that this is an experiment or it's reckless. We have waited for a great deal of time to be released, but Whitty's counsel, as Polly rightly describes it, is clear that doubling and doubling again leads in a very dangerous direction. I also think this, if you read the runes here in some of these newspapers, you can see some interesting messaging from the government on that point Polly was mentioning about the cautious but irreversible nature of the unlocking, because it's Lucy Fraser, the Solicitor General, who is speculating that we might have to have new restrictions. Not a healthcare professional, not a journalist asking mischievous questions. It's a serving member of the government in senior post who's suggesting we may have to go back into some kind of lockdown. At that point, you think the government's seeking to lay the groundwork for a possible reversal? Yeah,
the language has certainly changed, hasn't it? And the FT taking a more holistic view here, talking about the actions taken in the UK by Boris Johnson, not just putting people at risk here, but it's putting people at risk all over the world, Polly.
Yeah, because what you have to remember is that the dreadful disease is mutating all the time. And so the more people have it, the more possibility there is for mutations. Alex and I were discussing the Greek alphabet earlier. I think we've actually already had the gamma, epsilon, zeta and eta, but there's a lambda variant, and the next one I think would be mu. What we don't want is for one of those new variants to emerge that can really, really break through the vaccines. We know there's an impact of some of these variants on vaccine efficacy, but we haven't had something that just powers through it. And that's the risk. And it's a risk that if we had the Kent variant, which emerged in the UK last autumn, if another variant were to emerge from this pool of infections which is emitting, that could then spread around the world and cause, another situation.